Welcome to meeting number 35 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. The committee is meeting today at 3:41 Ottawa time, and we will hear from the Auditor General and the officials of Public Service and Procurement Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada as part of its study on the government's response to COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants at this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation of this video conference will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. To raise a point of order during the meeting, committee members should ensure their microphone is unmuted and say point of order to get the chair's attention. The clerk and the analysts are participating in the meeting virtually today. If you need to speak with them during the meeting, please email them through the committee email address. The clerk can also be reached through his mobile phone. For those people who are participating in the committee room, please note that masks are required for all staff at all times, and MPs may remove their masks only when they are seated. I will now invite the Auditor General to make her opening statements. Ms. Hogan?
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our audit report on securing personal protective equipment and medical devices during the COVID-19 pandemic. The report was tabled in the House of Commons on May 26th last. With me today is Jean Goulet, who is the principal responsible for the audit, as well as Milan Duvnac, who is the director for the audit.
On whether the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada, before and during the COVID-19 pandemic, helped to meet the needs of provincial and territorial governments for selected personal protective equipment, such as N95 masks and medical gowns, and medical devices such as testing swabs and ventilators. The audit also focused on whether Public Services and Procurement Canada provided adequate procurement support to the Public Health Agency of Canada. The audit showed that there were issues in planning and stockpile management before the pandemic. For example, we found that the Public Health Agency of Canada had not addressed long-standing and known issues with the systems and practices used to manage and operate the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. The agency knew of these issues because they had been raised in audits and reviews going back more than a decade. As a result, the Public Health Agency of Canada was not as prepared as it should have been to deal with the surge in requests for equipment from the provinces and territories triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, from February to August 2020, the agency could deliver only 4% of the N95 masks and only 12% of medical gowns requested by the provinces and territories. The audit also showed agility and responsiveness. Overall, the Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, and Public Services and Procurement Canada helped address the needs of provincial and territorial governments for personal protective equipment and medical devices. Faced with a crisis, these organizations worked around their outstanding issues with the management and oversight of the emergency equipment stockpiles and adapted their activities. For example, during the pandemic, the Public Health Agency of Canada improved how it assessed needs and allocated equipment to help meet the demand for personal protective equipment and medical devices from the provinces and territories. It also outsourced much of the warehousing and logistical support needed to deal with the exceptional volume of purchased equipment. De même, Santé Canada a réagi à la demande.
Similarly, Health Canada reacted to the increased demand created by the pandemic by modifying its management of license applications from suppliers for personal protective equipment and medical devices. Public Services and Procurement Canada also made adjustments by accepting some risks to facilitate the quick purchase of large quantities of equipment in a highly competitive market. one in which supply was not always keeping pace with demand. If the departments had not adapted their approaches to the circumstances, it is likely that the government would not have been able to acquire the volume of equipment that was necessary. Our recent audits of the government's pandemic response continue to show that when the people who make up the federal public service are faced with a crisis, they are able to rally and focus on serving the needs of Canadians. However, these audits also show that issues forgotten or left unaddressed have a way of coming back. And when they come back, it's typically at the worst possible time. Canada was not as well prepared to face the pandemic as it might have been had the stockpile of emergency equipment been better managed. If there's one overall lesson to learn from this pandemic, it is that government departments need to take action to resolve long-standing issues and to see the value in being better prepared for a rainy day. We made recommendations to the audited organizations, and they agreed with all of them. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We are now pleased to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. We will now start our first round of questioning, and first 6 minutes to Mr. Paul Hughes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Ms. Hogan. First of all, I'd like to say that we understand that these were very special circumstances with the COVID, and extraordinary means were needed to be quicker in response capabilities, but that doesn't remove the government's responsibility to better manage public coffers and public funds. I refer you to paragraph 100, 10.1 of your report. You said the anticipated payment value for the examined contracts was $118 million. So my first question is, do you agree that there was much more than that amount in advance, in advance payments, in other words? I could only imagine that, yes, that's $618 million, and advance payments for the contracts that we examined. So we only examined some of the contracts. So we could clearly estimate that the nearly $1 billion amount, because I imagine that must be around $1 billion. Do you agree with that estimate? I can't make any estimate because I don't know. We're not making a comparison. Okay, very well. But in the contracts that you've audited, were these all related to PPE and medical device contracts related specifically to COVID-19? Yes, our contracts that we examined included one of the items that we had examined during our audit. So our sample was not looking at all kinds of equipment that was purchased, but only we looked at N95 masks, we looked at testing swabs, ventilators, as well as medical gowns. And in your report, you said that PSPC had taken steps to recover amounts paid in advance for products that were not received. How many contracts of the ones that you examined were in the situation where the Government of Canada had to take steps to receive refunds because material was not delivered? In our sample of 39 contracts, there were 14 who had received advance payments. We found that in one case, a payment was made in advance and material had not yet been received. But TSPC was moving forward with the company on this subject. So I think you're talking about Tango? That's what's known? There's legal proceedings underway? Is that what you're talking about? It's public knowledge. I don't think so. You mean there's another company? I believe that Tango was where the equipment was received, but the quality of what was received was not up to par. And so now they're either exchanging or getting money back, whereas in this case, there was no supply received. So the government paid in advance, and after the advance payments, nothing was received. There was no material provided. Do you have an idea how much this represented? Are we talking about several $1 million? What is the approximate range? We were asked to keep this secret because this is still underway, but we're talking about a few $1 million. And delegations of authority. In your report, you talked about emergency delegations. You said you noted that the department was not always able to prove that the civil servants had respected the new grid for exceptional delegations of emergency powers. 41% of contracts, there was an absence of documentation demonstrating that this approval had been given. Have you examined the results of the contracts with the advance payments? You said yes, but did they respect the Treasury Board standards in terms of the fact that when you send advance payments, given that you're finding that there wasn't always appropriate auditing, how did you evaluate the results? Well, we looked at the 14 contracts where advance payments were made. We looked to see what audits were done, and there were certain checks that were made. They're not always done in the case of the pandemic, but one verification was to check the financial integrity, the financial capacity of a company, and that should have been assessed. That's required by the purchasing and procurement policies. In only 50% of times, in other words, 7 contracts, had this analysis performed. That's why we made a recommendation that even in the case of a pandemic, when the government is trying to prioritize speed and is assuming certain risks, this assessment should have been done regardless. As Auditor General, do you consider that there is the potential for corruption or error, major error, when the approval procedures are not properly documented? Usually we like that any assigning authorities or delegations of authorities be respected. And here we found that documentation was missing, so we couldn't confirm whether or not it was properly done. I would encourage things to be done better. But when it comes to analyzing the financial capacity, yes, I think once you're paying in advance, there should have been an analysis, even during a pandemic. Thank you.
Mr. Paul Hoos. We'll now go to Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens à remercier
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the Auditor General, who always takes the time to come and pay us a visit to talk about her reports. Thank you very much for the work that you do. In terms of your recommendation regarding the fact that Public Works should always have an opportunity to examine the financial viability and whether this was considered. I know this was done in contracts that you looked at. I know that it wasn't done in other contracts that you examined. I imagine that this is why you've made the recommendation that you made. Did you perform any comparison to see whether contracts where financial viability was checked were where it was delivery quicker or not as quick as the other contracts where this was not done? Do you understand what I'm asking? I think so. We audited 14 contracts where advance payments were made. In 7 of those cases, the viability determination was performed. I don't think that we looked at the speed of execution of, in other words, speed of supply and reception of the materials that were ordered. There are a lot of considerations. There's the manufacturing time. Did the supplier have the equipment in hand or not? There are a lot of things that come into play. We did look at the speed with which deliveries were made via the contracts, but I can't give you details about those 7. We didn't perform that analysis. Okay, I thought that perhaps you would have those figures because I was looking at the comments you made in your report where you talked about the average number, I'm translating myself here, the average number of contracts at signature and the first delivery by suppliers. So I thought that this is just my own personal curiosity to see whether there was any difference and whether there are any lessons to be learned. If there was no difference, perhaps that we could look at how to be sure that the recommendation will be respected. The other issue is that you talked about the quality of a public health agency in terms of the, how could I say this, the medical supplies and medical devices. What did you mean by that? Well, we looked at what Public Health Agency of Canada has done to ensure the quality of the personal protective equipment that was ordered. Because there was a call out to several suppliers. Several of them were unknown. They had never been used in the past by the Government of Canada. So they did a sample test to check the quality of the equipment in question before signing the contract or before recommending to Public Works that they sign a contract. And once the supplies were received, they tested the equipment to be sure that the level of quality was in respect of the requirements to be able to be used for medical purposes. Okay. You also made comments about the payments that were made in advance, and you said some suppliers were not able to say what they were going to do, or the Government of Canada in general was able to recover these sums, or have there been shortcomings? Well, the contract that I referred to earlier with the other member is one in which the supplier is being sued for this amount. And I'm just looking now. I want to pull something out here. I think you had said in 10 point... No, where is it? Maybe I'll ask the committee to be able to come back to that issue. I thought that you had said that in most cases, Public Works had obtained the money, but there were still a few suppliers with whom there's still problems. You're talking about the equipment that was purchased, whether it has all been received since we completed the audit. That I don't know, Mr. Goulet or Mr. Vignac, maybe you would have those answers. This is not related to the advance payments, but rather just the supplies in general. Am I understanding correctly? Jean or Milan, maybe... Oh, go ahead, Milan. I think Mr. Goulet is having technical difficulties.
Try and help out. So I think the best answer for that question is to refer you to the public information that PSPC has up to date. As of a couple of days ago, when I checked, the information was up to date to the 25th of May. This will give you a broader set of information, not just the specific contracts the 39 contracts that we examined. Merci.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair, I think I have about 20 seconds left, so I'll just say thank you to the Auditor General for her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. We will now go to Ms. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Vous êtes sur scène, Madame Vignola.
Ms. Vignola, you're on mute.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today, Ms. Hogan. It's always a pleasure to see you and to see your collaborators as well. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, this, of course, was an unexpected, let's call it quote-unquote unforeseen situation, even though 17 years of warnings from scientists. How should the federal government from here on in determine the acceptable level of risk when it comes to contracts for PPE and medical devices? When there is no due diligence audit of financial positions, should there be an acceptable level of risk that's determined? And if so, how should this be done? At this time, the policy in the procurement policy contracts require financial viability audits once payments are made in advance. And this is why we expected this to be done even during the pandemic, because of the high risk once payment is already made in advance. So normally, advance payments are not made. But this is not in every other procurement process. So normally, they do conduct an audit, and this time they didn't because it was an urgent situation, one that was out of control. But should another similar type of situation arise, in other words, out of control, emergency, have to act fast, and if advance payments would have to be made without necessarily having time to perform an audit, what should be accepted as a minimum level of risk? Well, I think that when the government has not worked with these suppliers before, they should not accept that risk. You have to understand that every stage in the procurement process is there so as to reduce risk. They will never eliminate risk completely. So even if an assessment is performed, it doesn't mean that there will be no problems with the contract. But it increases the likelihood of not having problems, and that's why these assessments should be performed. Thank you. Just for confirmation that I've understood you correctly, both in the report and what you've just said, in the contracts that you examined, some of which had not had the financial audit, only one is really problematic up until now in everything that you've checked. Yes, there were 14 contracts in which advance payments were made. 7 of the 14 had an assessment conducted, and only one of the advance payment contracts was one in which the equipment and supplies were not received. Were samples required from all suppliers who were going to receive advance payments to determine and audit the quality of what they were intending to provide? Was this asked of all suppliers in advance? I believe that samples for the agency tests were required for all suppliers, not only suppliers in cases of advance payments. I think it was for everybody. So PSPC said that they had been faced with all kinds of challenges during the pandemic. Are you satisfied with PSPC's response to your recommendation regarding advance payments? If yes, why? And if not, what could be improved? Well, obviously, they said they agreed with the recommendation. I would have preferred that they said, yes, they agreed, and they will do all the viability assessments in the future. They mentioned the need to strike a balance between speed and testing. And I think that because there are several tests, when advance payments are made, at least the payment, the test for viability should have been performed. I'll get back to FTE and Baylis, where orders for ventilators in quantities enough, I think we could supply the whole planet for the next 10 years. And we received 21,168 were distributed, 350 in India. Other professionals and respiratory therapists said that those really, the problem was not really getting ventilators. We needed the specialized staff, and we didn't have respiratory therapists, at least not in Quebec. In terms of Baylis, was this a contract that was in one of the unaudited advance payment contracts where you didn't assess the financial viability? I think you're referring to a contract which was not one of the ones in our sample. So I don't have information on that more than anything that I would have read in the newspapers as you would have. Okay, so that remains to be seen.
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. And I gave you 10 seconds of from Mr. Drouin's extra 20 that was left. We'll go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And as always, it's a pleasure to have the Auditor General before this committee. I often talk about how there's a bit of a blur between public accounts and OGGO, but we were fortunate today to receive to the public accounts a response through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Hogan's appearance before the Public Accounts Committee on June 1st, which discussed the reports that we're dealing with today in response to preparedness for COVID. And in that committee, I raised some questions along with my colleague, Mr. Berthold, about the responsiveness and the preparedness of our government in the months leading up to COVID. And so we have seen in this report, and is often talked about, our government's response in the bulk procurement of critical and life-saving PPEs. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Hogan, our Auditor General, in your response, based on your audit period, you referenced the 56 requests to the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile for assistance that included PPEs and medical devices and is within the scope of your audit. And you released a table that shows the types of selected personal protective equipment and medical devices that the provinces and territories requested. And because I have the access to this by way of it being posted on public accounts, I'll just share with this committee, and I'll run it down, that there were close to 7 million medical gowns requested, but only 790 shipped, so only about 12% received. There were 3,261,935 N95 masks requested, but only 130,380 N95 masks shipped, which is about a 4% rate. There were 45,000 test swabs requested by the provinces and only 20,700 delivered, so 46% success rate. And out of the ventilators, it is listed from the Auditor General that there were 538 ventilators requested from the province, with only 96 shipped, for about 18% success rate on the shipping. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Hogan, is it safe to say that the federal government, in responding to the provinces, shipped everything that they had within the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile to the provinces?
So thank you very much for the question. I would like to let the member know that in addition this morning, I shared that letter with this committee, with the chair of this committee, so that everyone here as well could get a copy of it, because I felt it was relevant to our hearing today. So the table that you're referring to is what was done, what we looked at during our audit period. So the requests that were received between February and August of 2020. Unfortunately, I can't tell you whether everything that was shipped was what was in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile at that time, for a few reasons. One, as I've mentioned, I don't believe that we can rely on the data of what was in there, but the stockpile was also used at times to provide equipment to federal organizations. So it wasn't necessarily the entirety of what was in there.
Okay, so based on the charts in terms of understanding what the roles and responsibilities are, through you, Mr. Chair, for the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, I'm to understand, and perhaps Ms. Hogan can confirm, that it is the federal government's responsibility to provide in this way, coming out of SARS and H1N1, that we were to have a responsive ability distributed across the country to respond to pandemics like this, based on the framework for the National Emergency Stockpile. And that's kind of where our responsibility ends, that it was up to the provinces to access this. So I guess through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Hogan, if we know that the percentage of requested units shipped were 12%, 4%, 46%, and 18%, is it safe to say then, based on the previous answer, that either the government was withholding critical ventilators and N95 masks, or they simply didn't have it? Which one, in her opinion, would be the case?
So in my opinion, it was clear that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile was not ready to respond to a pandemic. I do want to provide a bit, I guess, the nuance of the purpose of the stockpile. It's to deal with surge capacity. And so each province and territory manages healthcare, which includes managing and having their own stockpile of personal protective equipment, and it's when they don't have any left there
But
and they need more
Mr.
that they
Chair,
turn
I need to reclaim my time on this. You'll recall that this government threw out 2 million N95 masks in 2019 in the lead up to this. At some point in time, it was deemed necessary to have millions of critical PPEs for surge. And now we're talking about a response on the N95s, 4%. 4% successful shipping rates out to the province on the eve of a global catastrophic pandemic. In your opinion, final question, would you not agree that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile was a catastrophic failure on the eve of COVID?
I would agree that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile was not ready for this pandemic. And one of those long-standing issues that the Public Health Agency had not addressed, which was doing a needs assessment to establish that baseline threshold that should have been in the stockpile in order to be prepared for a pandemic. And so I encourage you to ask these questions to the departmental officials when they appear after us.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and thank you, Mr. Green. And there goes the other 10 seconds of Mr. Drouin. We'll now start the second round, and starting with Mr. McCauley for five minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, welcome back. You talked about surge capacity of the strategic stockpile, that it was designed for surge capacity. What numbers would have had to been in the stockpile to cover what you consider surge capacity?
So I unfortunately don't have the knowledge or the data to be able to come up with that. That's something that the federal government was supposed to do following its response and lessons learned from H1N1 and SARS.
The reason I asked that, and Mr. Green actually brought it up, or you started bringing up, is the role of the stockpile. Now, we heard the Minister of Public Health repeatedly state, both in this committee and the House, it wasn't the role of the stockpile to provide for the provinces, but you're saying it was to provide for surge capacity. So I'm trying to figure out what its true role was and what actual numbers they should have had. And a follow-up, what was the effect then of their ability to handle the surge, considering they closed down warehouses and threw out so much PPE? But also we donated a fair amount to the government of China. And I was just trying to figure out how each of those roles played in, I think, what is Mr. Green called the catastrophic failure, but perhaps in memory of Mr. Ferguson, we'll call it the incomprehensible failure.
So all I can tell you is what we were able to review in documents, in talking with officials, of the purpose of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, and it's meant to be sort of the last line of defense after provinces and territories have tried to purchase their own and looked at their own stockpile. I believe there's even an agreement that provinces and territories can help each other out if needed. And then the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile is there to help deal with that surge. So I think it was clear it was not ready for this pandemic.
Do you think they're clear now on what they have to do? And the reason I'll ask this is, again, I'm going to quote from the Minister of Health in the House of Commons. She stated, "The stockpile was never meant to accumulate PPE, but rather other kinds of treatments for kinds of biological events." So here we have the health minister saying, well, it wasn't meant to hold PPE. we have PHAC throwing out PPE, and you're saying, well, it's meant to provide surge capacity for PPE. Are you comfortable with PHAC's response to your response that they're going to get their act together?
I believe that the Public Health Agency has committed to learn and to take action.
Know,
so to learn from what happened.
Committing to learn doesn't mean they're going to get it done. Do you think they're going to get it done? And it leads into another question is the rest of the responses from the government, they've stated, we agree, but do you see metrics to their responses besides just we agree with the auditor's assessment?
Well, I know that what we saw during the pandemic was that they didn't keep going with the way they were going. So requests for assistance, which was how the provinces and territories could access the stockpile, stopped, and they moved to bulk procurement. So I do think you should be asking the Public Health Agency whether or not it's going to address longstanding issues.
Great. In the responses in your report, are you satisfied with what the government, do you have a sense of confidence in the government's response of how they're going to handle your recommendations? Again, apart from PHAC saying a year down the road after the pandemic, we'll get around to doing our study, but I don't see a lot of metrics in their other responses. And we've seen that unless you have metrics to measure things by, things do not get done.
No,
Are you satisfied with your responses?
We asked the Public Health Agency and the other departments to provide metrics in their responses. I trust that they'll do that in their detailed action plans. I know that the Public Accounts Committee will ask for a detailed action plan when they study this report. I guess what I can tell you is I am frustrated with the fact that the government has not been acting on known issues. I've tabled 11 reports since February, and in many instances, that is my finding. And so I do think that, I'm on the day of the eve of my 1 year as Auditor General, and I hope that I won't be repeating these messages for the next 9 years of my mandate. They should take action.
I sincerely hope so. I know Mr. Ferguson, when he was presenting one about Northern Affairs doctoring reports on graduations of Indigenous, he said it had been going on for close to a decade with no action. So hopefully we will see some response to this. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to thank the Auditor General and all the witnesses for joining our committee meeting again today. But importantly for the work that's being done to ensure that we can learn from and continually improve how we do PPE processes, but particularly in the context of a global health emergency response. My first question, in the report, you note the various departments appear to have taken away some lessons learned from past projects and introduce some new and more agile procurement practices. And I was hoping you could be specific on what that means in terms of actions that have actually been taken.
So thank you for your kind words. We work very hard and hope that we deliver reports that provide value to the government as well as Canadians. So in the report on PPE, where we saw the government be agile and react, I would probably highlight in 4 ways for you. One was the development of a long-term national supply and demand model, which did not exist before, which helps determine the needs across the entire country. Then the Public Health Agency moved to bulk procurement, which was led by Public Service and Procurement Canada in order to procure large volumes in a very competitive market where supply often really didn't keep up with demand, at least at the beginning for sure of the pandemic. The third item that we would have noticed was the outsourcing of warehousing and logistical capacity to deal with this big increase in demand, which allowed the federal government to get equipment to provinces and territories quicker. And then finally, we saw the Public Health Agency collaborate with the provinces and territories to agree on a scarce resource allocation strategy. So when the purchasing could not keep up with the demand. How would the equipment received be distributed to all the provinces and territories in an equitable manner? So all of those were great, but it was very reactive. What we hope the government learns is that now we have to maintain those, build on them, and not be so reactive during the next health crisis.
Maybe just to follow up on that, I mean, obviously these are new approaches that are being taken, and how do you want to see implementation of those, some of those lessons learned be carried forward consistently into the future, or do you see a lot of those measures as kind of more just emergency response, or ones that you want to see kind of proactively be done?
I think a few of them are really emergency response, right? That reactive is very tiring and difficult. But the scarce resource allocation strategy is one that I think has got a bit more of a long-term life to it, as well as the long-term supply and demand model. What I hope the departments will do is actually act on the three main issues that they have known for about a decade. One, which is to come up with that level of assessment, that needs assessment of what should be in a stockpile for a health crisis. They need to deal with their data quality issues and replace their IT system that supports the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, because it's critical in a crisis. And then finally, they need to make sure that they have the resources, which includes the right budget, to deal with all of the actions that they need to take to better prepare the government for the next crisis.
Definitely, and I think that recommendation on improving digital infrastructure is one that that we'll hear from all types of aspects of not only response to the pandemic, but how we're going to deliver services to Canadians in an ongoing manner in a modern world. One of the takeaways that I have from the report is the assumed value add of or increased resiliency of a more iterative approach to procurement. And I'm wondering, are there demonstrated timeline improvements or better deliverables management when it comes to contracts agreed to and products delivered?
Do you mean based on what we saw in this report and the responsiveness? I think what we saw here during procurement is that Public Service and Procurement Canada accepted risks, and one of those was invoking the national security exception, which means that procurement can happen without a competitive process. So that should not typically be an approach, right? So that's happening in a crisis here. The second was really making advance payments, which again, as we talked about previously, is not something that you should normally do in a procurement process. So I think these were unique to dealing with the situation, and you know, traditional procurement approaches are likely the best, depending on the circumstances going forward. Right?
Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and thank you, Mr. Weiler. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Ms. Hogan. We've just been talking about PSBC's ability to respond quickly. PHAC's ability to respond quickly. And warehouses were made for emergencies and not to give ongoing supplies to provinces and territories. Here's my question. Now, with what we've learned from COVID, is the Public Health Agency better able to meet the emergency needs and to better assess what is required? In other words, to plan better and to get organized better now that they're hopefully at the end of this process? Well, you're talking about Public Services and Procurement Canada on the procurement side? Well, that's a question that you should ask them. We audited the way that they reacted and changed their processes in order to respond to the immediate needs, which was an extreme need in a highly competitive market. They should be learning lessons from this, of course, but how they'd like to change their procedures in the future is a question really to address to them. As Auditor General, you're sorry for the animal image, but you're our watchdog. And to stay in the context of mythology, there was a Cassandra who spoke, and nobody believed her. I'm hearing your report. I'm listening to you speak, and I get the impression that there's some disappointment because there are things that should have been done long ago. They should have been resolved a long time ago. I know that you have made all kinds of recommendations, but if you had to make one recommendation so that we would never able be caught with our pants down again and that you would really be listened to, what would that recommendation be to procurement? I don't know if I would only give it to procurement. I don't think I'd only give it to PSPC. I think I would give it to the entire federal government. And that would be to recognize the need and the value of investing in what we can't see. In other words, is it an IT system in support of a significant program? Is it to restock equipment such as masks in the national stockpile? Is it to address long-standing problems for human resources in Indigenous communities, for their health? These are all things that you don't see, but they should be addressed. The government is aware of these problems.
Ms. Hogan, and if you feel that there's more that you can add to that answer, please, by all means, submit that in writing to the clerk, and we would be happy to give that to the rest of the members. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. And, noting in the questions in the follow-up, based on the letter that has been provided, and based on the abysmal response, you noted that, through you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Hogan noted that they did not analyze the distribution of equipment in each of the agency's warehouses because it had already been analyzed as a part of the agency's internal audits and other reports that it had commissioned. Mr. Chair, through you, is Ms. Hogan satisfied knowing the failure of their response in the surge capacity? Is she satisfied based on her audit that the internal reports of the agency and the reports that it had commissioned were actually valuable and successful?
Well, I haven't looked at all of them. I have looked at a few. I'm satisfied that they provided valuable recommendations. I am not satisfied that action was not taken. I don't believe that I need to make recommendations for departments to keep acting on things they already know they should act on. I believe they should.
Mr. Chair, the department made the decision to shutter 3 of the 9 national emergency facilities. It stated that it could save a couple $100,000, and now we're hearing that the government has been forced to outsource for surge capacity and warehousing. Could you, through you, would Ms. Hogan care to comment on how that decision and subsequent need for surge capacity, how did that weigh in her audit? Is it something that she noted? Is it something that she recommended for them to bring back in-house and to actually have the adequate supply on hand for surge capacity?
One of the recommendations that we made is that they need to really develop a comprehensive plan about the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. And I think that includes many things. That includes determining the thresholds of certain types of equipment that should be in place, in making sure they have the system to support that so that they have good quality data. It also would include then making assessment of where equipment should be and where it should be stored in order to be able to have a quick and easy distribution across the country when needed. Those are all things that should be part of that comprehensive plan.
Mr. Chair, through you, respectfully, they had that. They had 9 of them, and they made the decision to shut down 3 and throw out millions of critical PPEs on the eve of a global pandemic. So decisions were made and policies were in place. They were just, somebody made the decision to shutter those warehouses, and I'd like to find out who.
Thank you, Mr. Green. That's a great question. Ms. Hogan, if you can answer that to the committee in writing, it would be appreciated.
I believe he should ask the department that question. I think that's theirs to provide.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. We'll now go to Mr. Harder, or Ms. Harder for 5 minutes. My apologies.
No problem, Mr. Kitchen. All right. Well, hello, Ms. Hogan. Welcome back. Good to have you here once again. Just a few questions here, I guess, for you with regard to the procurement of personal protective equipment. Now, I know that, you know, hundreds of millions, billions actually, of dollars have been spent in order to procure equipment and supplies over the course of the pandemic. And I know that it's been done at, you know, a tremendous speed, as is acknowledged in your report. One of the other things that you acknowledge is that officials didn't necessarily have the time to do thorough background checks or research just because of the speed at which they were moving. So I'm wondering if you can shed light on whether or not you and your team looked at the procurement of equipment in terms of what type of labor was involved in producing the equipment. So of course, when we're bringing materials over from places like China, we know that there is a history of human rights atrocities. We know that there is often forced labor that is being used in order to produce equipment or supplies. Did you find any of this in your report? I guess in your research, sorry.
So in the contracts that we looked at, we did look at what mechanisms they put in place. So normally there are many checks and balances, as I mentioned earlier, that help reduce the risk around a procurement. Ethical ones, integrity ones, financial viability, there's a risk assessment. Not all of them were done in these instances. So we were able to look at the ones that were done. And so we did not look at the ethical because it was not one of the measures that was addressed in some of the contracts that we reviewed.
Okay, and thank you. And why was ethical done away with? Like, that seems like an interesting category to just kind of throw to the wayside. Is there any light that you can shed on why that decision was made by the department?
I'm not sure. I might ask Mr. Duvnak if he would like to add to that.
Sure.
Or you should ask the department, I guess, when they appear next. Milan, I don't know if you'd like to jump in.
Perhaps I can add, Ms. Hogan, we did not focus on the who actually produced the equipment. Given the nature of the, again, exceptional circumstances and the urgency, we left that to be a decision for the procurement folks. We focused on the process that was in place that we could audit. And as Ms. Hogan mentioned, this is a good question for the department. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So there's no light that can be shed as to why that category in terms of the risk assessment being done seems to be scrapped, I guess. Ethics wasn't given any regard.
But we can't. I think you'd have to ask the department.
Okay. So, sorry, are you able to give any insight as to why some categories were kept and some categories were scrapped when it came to the risk assessment that was done? Was there any sort of justification provided to you as the Auditor General?
Again, I'm going to have to ask, one of my team members to maybe talk to that level of detail. I don't know if Milan or Jean want to join in.
So we looked at the process that the department had in place. What we do when we do audits, we look at what is supposed to be done, and then we follow the key parts of that process. Of course, when you're talking about a procurement process, you're talking about dozens and dozens and perhaps hundreds of checks and balances. We picked those that were key for this circumstance where we could follow and we could provide audit level assurance for the 39 contracts that we examined, which gave us a representative sample for the 4 types of PPE and equipment that we examined.
Okay, and so when that determination was made, are you able to shed light on why certain categories were chosen as the priority?
Again, I believe the members should ask that question to Public Service and Procurement Canada.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I guess just another question then that you perhaps can shed some light on is, do you think that this should be a category that is kept within the consideration when a risk assessment is being done, regardless of the nature of, pandemic or no pandemic?
I think that, the categories, what's decided to be done really does depend on the circumstances, and really it is a call based on the supplier, on the circumstances. I mean, I do think that it's, again, a judgment call that the department made that you should ask them about.
Okay. Would you make any recommendations as to ensuring that we do not continue to procure equipment that may be from forced labor camps, let's say, such as those that are existing within the Uyghur population in China?
Well, I obviously think that the right checks and balances need to be done to make sure that the federal government procures things in a fair way from reputable organizations, and that they get value for money. So again, in the middle of a pandemic, they made certain judgment calls, and I believe that you should ask them about those judgment calls.
Thank you, Ms. Harder.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll now go to Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and her colleagues for once again being with us today. I want to extend, my recognition for the emergency work of all of the procurement officials and those that have mobilized in the face of this pandemic is remarkable. But so is the fact that the Auditor General was able to mobilize so quickly and conduct such a thorough examination on short notice. So hats off for that. Now look, the 2.7 billion of items of PPE procured, about 400 contracts. You say you did a representative, you examined a representative sample of those contracts. And in your view, the department gets a pretty robust and positive score. Would that be a fair characterization of your report?
You're talking about the Public Service and Procurement Canada?
Yes, correct. Indeed. Right. Yes, I should have been clearer on that.
That's okay. Well, we looked at, as I said, a fraction of the contracts, right? We looked at 39 because we were targeting contracts that included one of the personal protective equipments that we scoped in. And while I would say the process wasn't perfect because we had recommendations, I believe that some of the risks that they took were reasonable in the context in order to secure personal protective equipment in a market where supply was not often keeping up with the demand, and that the country needed to get to the table to get personal protective equipment. So in those circumstances, it was a reasonable approach.
Now, I've seen a lot of Auditor General reports, and I've seen some bad ones, and I've seen some good ones. This one does appear, though, to you do underscore the notion of risk, and you do underscore the notion that the department demonstrated some continuous improvement, even on short notice, in executing against these risks and executing on what was a very chaotic global marketplace for this material. Is that not true?
I think we were balanced. We clearly noted that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile was not ready, and that the Public Health Agency had not acted on known issues that it had known for a decade. But yes, we then saw during the pandemic the reactive response that helped meet the needs of provinces and territories, and it showed collaboration between the provinces and territories and federal departments. So I think it was a balanced report, but the fact remains is that action needs to be taken on those longstanding issues.
And the department's indicated that it will take those actions, I believe. That's a question.
Yes, yeah. They have. They also indicated that they committed to taking actions in 2010 and in 2013 and now again. So I do hope that they do that.
You're talking now about the stockpile.
Yes.
Okay, I'm referring specifically to the process of procurement. And let's examine this notion of risk a little bit. Let's remind ourselves of the situation in March of 2020, where we had global shortages and stockouts of PPE. So a lot of emergency stockpiles were finding themselves in a bad way around the world, and really only one country of origin that dominated the market for this equipment. And as you went through all of these contracts, Madam Hogan, you concluded that the department acted with dispatch, with the appropriate level of urgency, but also, to the extent that was possible, balanced that risk by applying appropriate controls at various stages of the process. Is that an appropriate characterization of your report?
I believe that Public Service and Procurement Canada took reasonable risks, but as I said, not always in a good way. It wasn't perfect. There were some recommendations, for example, ensuring that financial viability was done whenever prepayments are made on a contract. Even though you need to balance speed and risk, there are some certain basic elements I believe should be done.
Is a once-in-a-generation global pandemic the appropriate time for governments to take appropriate risk?
I believe in the circumstances, given the marketplace, that moving to mass procurement, bulk procurement, in order to help respond to the needs, was very responsive, and that the risks that we saw taken in our contracts that we evaluated were reasonable in the circumstances. Yes.
And once again, you did note.
Thank you, Mr. McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And with that, we've come to the end of our
Mr. Chair, just a quick point of order, sir.
Mr. Green?
I could, thank you. I just think it'd be appropriate that our committee thank Ms. Hogan and congratulate her on her 1 year tomorrow. I failed to do that in my haste for questioning, but I do recall being at her first committee and just want to say that she's done a fantastic job, as Mr. McKinnon has pointed out. And despite all of my peppering, she's probably going to be sick of me at some point. I just wanted to extend that well wish to her, and she's done a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Green, and I will allow that point of order. And
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And Ms. Hogan, I want to thank you for being with us again today. It's much appreciated. I know that you will step off this camera right now, and we appreciate that. I did want to say to you, though, I wanted to thank you for providing to us the letter early this morning in both official languages, because that allowed us to get it out to the members as quickly as we received it. And so thank you again for that. And with that said, I now understand we do have our other participants here. And so we will go to, I'll now invite the Public Services and Procurement Canada if they would like to deliver an opening statement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Michael Meals. I am Assistant Deputy Minister with PSPC. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's my pleasure to discuss the Auditor General's report on securing personal protective equipment and medical devices during the pandemic, and specifically the role of Public Services and Procurement Canada in supporting the work of the Public Health Agency of Canada. With me today is the Director General Pandemic Response Sector, Alain Doirion. First, we'd like to thank the Auditor General for this report and the recommendation identified for PSPC. In her report, the Auditor General recognized the significant work by our department to secure PPE and medical devices during a period of unprecedented global demand. The audit found that PSPC mobilized its workforce and adapted quickly to deliver on urgent procurement requirements for Canadians. Mr. Chair, procuring the goods and services required to combat the pandemic, particularly in the first 100 days, was an around-the-clock effort undertaken in an extraordinary environment. PSPC took an aggressive approach to fulfill immediate, emerging, and long-term medical supply needs. This included buying in bulk from distributors in Canada and internationally in order to secure key items. This approach has allowed us to secure over 2.7 billion pieces of personal protective equipment and medical supplies to date.
Increase in demand for medical equipment in the first few months of the pandemic drastically reduced global supply and stressed supply chains. On top of our existing supply arrangements and standing offers, PSPC leveraged emergency contracting authorities as part of its procurement strategy. In addition, advance payments to suppliers were required to help Canada secure access to items that were ready to ship and be delivered immediately. Advance payments are normally used in exceptional circumstances only, but they became quite common during the early part of the pandemic response. In our report, the Auditor General recognized that PSPC accepted and mitigated risks in order to procure large quantities of equipment in a very competitive market, and that without this action, fewer pieces of equipment would have been available to frontline workers and vulnerable Canadians. The Auditor General also provided one recommendation to PSPC regarding financial checks of suppliers involving advance payments, which we accept. Mr. Chair, since the very beginning, we have worked tirelessly to acquire supplies and equipment to support Canadians and frontline healthcare workers, as well as all Canadians. At the outset of the pandemic, PSBC established processes aimed at ensuring oversight and due diligence while balancing our needs to procure equipment as quickly as possible in a crisis. However, we recognize that procurement processes can always be improved while we continue to prioritize the health and safety of Canadians. Today, the situation is different. The market is more stable and domestic production of PPE has since increased. PSPC has helped establish this increase in domestic production with contracts going to Canadian producers whenever possible, including agreements with Quebec-based Medicom and 3M in Ontario for Made in Canada N95 respirators. Le ministère a aussi recommencé à utiliser le processus.
The department has also returned to the use of competitive bidding processes where circumstances permit and where the needs are not urgent. PSPC has issued a certain number of competitive procurement processes specifically for Canadian manufacturers and for Indigenous providers to supply other items such as surgical masks, face shields, and gowns. And PSPC will continue to expand the use of competitive bidding processes to secure the goods and services required in order to meet Canada's evolving needs in response to COVID-19. Once again, we thank the Auditor General for her report. This audit will help Canada to adapt its ongoing response to this pandemic and will inform our response to future emergency situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. And now we will go to the Public Health Agency of Canada for some opening statements.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Chair and the committee members for inviting the Public Health Agency of Canada to return to speak today. My name is Cindy Evans and I'm the Vice President of Emergency Management. In this role, I'm responsible for the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. As you may recall from my previous visit to this committee, the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, or the NESS, manages and allocates supplies that provinces and territories can request in emergencies when their own resources are insufficient, such as during infectious disease outbreaks, natural disasters, and other public health events. As the NESS modernized, it focused on stockpiling strategic medical supplies that are not typically held by provinces and territories. This includes items such as specialized vaccines and other drugs that require controlled environmental conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic is on a scale that's not been seen in over 100 years, and it placed a great demand on the global supply of personal protective equipment, or PPE, medical supplies, and other supplies. In response, the Government of Canada quickly mobilized to secure and rapidly distribute supplies to the provinces and territories. This was done by launching a bulk procurement process that ultimately led to the procurement of over 2.5 billion units of PPE, medical equipment, and other supplies. Through long-term contracts with third-party warehousing and logistics providers, we expanded our warehousing footprint to over 2 million square feet to accommodate the unprecedented quantities of supplies. Since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, we've been able to distribute over 1 billion units of PPE, medical equipment, and vaccine ancillary supplies to the provinces and territories to support our frontline healthcare workers. While significant strides have been made in the past year, the Public Health Agency of Canada acknowledges that it was not as prepared as it could have been prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the dedicated and collaborative work of the agency and its federal partners to rapidly secure and distribute PPE medical devices supported the needs of the provinces and the territories. The Public Health Agency of Canada appreciates the Auditor General's recognition of the significant work which was undertaken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The agency accepts all of the recommendations from the Auditor General and recognizes that the performance audit identifies areas for improvement that will guide the agency to be better prepared for future health events of this magnitude. This includes reviewing the management of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile and enforcing service level expectations for contracts with third-party warehousing and logistics providers. The agency is still in active response mode, distributing NES assets to provinces and territories in need. We have committed to responding to the Auditor General's recommendation within 1 year of the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're working on a comprehensive management plan that will take into account lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, as the NES is intended to provide surge capacity to the provinces and territories, we will continue to work closely with them to review and assess Canada's needs for key medical supplies in an emergency. We will also better define the federal, provincial, and territorial roles and responsibilities in preparation for future emergencies. This includes reviewing the management of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile and enforcing service level expectations for contracts with third-party warehousing and logistics providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. And we'll now go into questions. And we'll start with 6 minutes with Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Witnesses, thanks for joining us today. Mr. Mills, I want to chat briefly about the sole source contract to SNC for the mobile health units. Who made the decision to order these? Because it did not come from Health Canada or PHAC, came from within PSPC.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, I'd first like to clarify, we don't have a contract with SNC. We have a contract with the joint venture, SNC Lavalin PAE Inc. The choice to procure MHUs was made in the context where we were looking globally.
Okay, no, I didn't ask the context. Who made the decision to, please?
The PSPC as a department made the decision to lean forward. And
PSPC is not a human entity by itself. Who made the decision?
Sorry, the decision predated me. I'd have to get back to which officials were involved in the specific decision.
Now, none of the have been used of the SNC partnership, but there is money in the estimates, the supplementary estimates, listing $650.9 million to store, deploy, and operate and maintain the mobile health units. Is this for the BC side of the two sole source contracts, or is some of this money going to the SNC partnership?
So we have in total 4 MHUs that have been purchased, 2 which are currently deployed in Ontario and 2 which were held in reserve, one of which is the SNC Lavalin PAE joint venture units, which are part of their contract is to maintain them in storage and to be ready to deploy.
Okay. So one's being held in reserve, but the supplementary estimates is asking for $650.9 million for the mobile health units and other uses. So how much is going for mobile health units and how much more to the SNC partnership of that? If you don't know offhand, you can get back to us. That's fine.
So as far as I know, as of to date, so both those contracts have total value. They're task-based authorizations, which could go up to $150 million each. As of today, we're around $64 million that has been spent on the SNC PAE contract, and we're about 70
one held in reserve
for design for
the one held in reserve. Let me ask you,
as well as equipment.
Wow.
And supplies.
For the one held in reserve. Let me ask you, in your opening statement, you said you've returned to competitive bidding where appropriate. Can you give us some examples of where you haven't returned to competitive bidding? So what are you still sole sourcing or using an NSC to purchase something that it's not appropriate to go competitive?
Very few things. The one that I could give an example of is in certain cases for testing, provinces and territories will have proprietary testing equipment. In those cases, there are only certain type of test kits that can be used with those proprietary test equipment. So those would have to be sole source contracts.
Okay, but very little else?
Very little else, yeah.
Okay. PHAC, thanks for joining us. I appreciate some of your comments about the NES. I think it's been about roughly 1 billion pieces of PPE distributed, which is leaving about 1 billion pieces in backup in the warehouses. Is that approximately correct? And is that kind of the new par that we're setting in the NESS, or Do we have commitments to get X amount of that billion sent out right away?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The specific amounts in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile will continue to fluctuate. We have the bulk procurement that's coming in where 80% is allocated out, as well as the replenishment of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. So we've targeted to have in the order of an 8-week supply across 6 of the primary commodities, and that's gowns, gloves, surgical masks,
okay. So if we've got $1 billion in supply, how many weeks is that? If you've got an 8-week, if you want to have an 8-week supply, how many pieces or how many weeks is that $1 billion going to cover? Approximate ballpark is even fine.
So I'd have to get back to you with the specifics. It would differ across the different commodities.
How far are we from actually resetting, our baseline or our par stock for the emergency stockpile?
So as I've said, the amount that is, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The amounts that we have in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile will continue to fluctuate, and we will continue to prioritize pushing out the products to the provinces.
Know. When will we actually reset a total so we're not caught in the situation we were this time? It's not always going to be in flux. We'll eventually have to set a standard of this is what we're actually going to carry. When will we know that?
Thank you for the question. So as I've said, we've targeted to have an 8-week supply across the 6 primary commodities that are important in a respiratory infection situation. When we have achieved that for the majority of those commodities, with the exception of gloves, which continue to be in higher demand from the provinces, and we continue to prioritize those requests. So that's the reason that there's a fluctuation.
Okay. In your response to the Auditor General's report, you stated a year after the pandemic ends, you'll have a better plan put out. Is that a year after the WHO says the pandemic's done? Is a year after Canada has reached kind of a more steady state? And why does it take an entire year to kind of put this together, a proper response to the AG's report?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As I've said in my opening remarks, we continue to be in active response mode. So we will continue to prioritize our efforts to move product to the provinces.
The question about who's deciding when the pandemic's over, is that our government or? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Thank you, Ms. Evans. We'll now go to Mr. Kazmierczuk for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Evans, question for you. The $7.4 billion that the federal government paid for purchasing the 2.7 billion items of PPE, and again, it's just mind-boggling when I think about that number. How much of that is shared or cost shared with the provinces and the territories?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The Government of Canada has provided significant funding and resources to support the response to COVID-19. So I would say that we had invested more than $19 billion to help the provinces and territories through the Safe Restart Agreement. And this also includes $4.5 billion to purchase PPE for national use, an additional $3 billion to provinces and territories for their own PPE investments. So it was federally funded.
No, totally federally funded.
That's correct.
Okay. We know that we've heard, for example, today we talked about the 2.7 billion items of PPE that were purchased. About 1.5 billion of those have been delivered to date. And on March 24th, the minister explained that Canada has, quote, a lot of PPE and space at its warehouses and that its long-term contracts afford it readiness for any eventuality. Looking forward, as demand for PPE winds down, are there any concerns about PPE expiring before they are used?
Mr. Chair, thank you for your question. The life cycle management for the personal protective equipment, which we purchased, remains a top priority. So we have continued to function on a first in, first out basis so that we're sending out the oldest supplies first. We continue to work through our provincial governance structures, the Logistics Advisory Committee with our provincial counterparts in terms of discussing life cycle management and options as well to work with the territories in terms of provinces and territories for the mechanisms to best distribute. We also are looking to other opportunities for deployment and divestment, including Canada's role in supporting the global response to the pandemic. Thank you.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about potentially sharing those PPE globally, as you said, what that might look like?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So we have, working with our counterparts at Global Affairs Canada, are working and looking at a number of areas in the world which are challenged with respect to COVID response, and where there are commodities that are in surplus of what we may require in Canada. We have been looking to work on international donation. So as was announced previously, we were in a position to donate ventilators, for example, to India based on the dire situation that they have been facing.
Are there other examples, recent examples that you have of donations that have been made or donations that are planned?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Early on in the pandemic at a federal level and as well our provincial and territorial counterparts, purchasing was done in a way to really obtain whatever products that we could get our hands on that would provide infection prevention control for our frontline healthcare workers. In some cases, we have supplies which may not be the key preference of the healthcare system. I'll just give an example, a surgical mask, which is not ASTM standard, or gowns which might contain latex. So we are looking for alternative options, alternative settings, for example, outreach to charitable organizations in Canada where those surgical masks, which wouldn't meet wouldn't be the choice for use in the healthcare system, may perhaps be valuable in a homeless shelter, for example, as well, where these can support critical and challenging situations internationally. Again, these are products which are acceptable. It's just they're not meeting the preferences of our target healthcare system users.
So in short, it looks like we're going to meet whatever demand we have here domestically, and we'll make sure that the PPEs go to good use, if not domestically, then in the global fight against COVID. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yes, that would reflect the approach that we're taking with respect to life cycle management and our state of readiness. Thank you.
Okay. Does the government intend to coordinate bulk orders of PPE and medical supplies on behalf of provinces and territories after the pandemic, and why or why not?
Certainly, one of the basic premise or principle underpinning emergency response is that at a municipal and provincial territorial level, they are prepared to deal with emergencies and have the supplies to do that. I would also say it certainly wouldn't be the role of the Public Health Agency of Canada to deliver healthcare services or have the supplies to deliver that. So certainly this was a unique situation in which, based on the global challenges in purchasing, the bulk procurement made sense. So we'll continue to work with the provinces and territories going forward in terms of where those supply and demand modeling situates us as well. Certainly there's been a stabilization in the market, and our provincial and territorial partners have found themselves much more effectively situated with their own supply chains, with their own supplies and stockpiles. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kazmierczuk, and thank you, Ms. Evans. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to piggyback on what my colleague Mr. McCauley was discussing with you a few minutes ago. So We understand that everybody was taken by surprise by this pandemic, even though there had been 15 to 20 years worth of warnings from scientists. Okay, we got that. But a comprehensive stockpile management plan after the pandemic, when the date for the end of the pandemic is not really known, how far advanced is that plan? I hope you've begun to work on it. And so what's its status?
As I've stated, we are in active response mode right now. We'll continue to prioritize the provision of critical supplies to provinces and territories. We will continue with incremental changes and continuous improvement in the midst of the pandemic. But we will be looking to, when we've seen things like a decrease in or removal of the emergency orders in the provinces and territories, some of the key metrics which should say we're out of pandemic mode and Canada moving more into the steady state of COVID-19, we'll be then in a better position to focus our full effort on our commitments which we've made in response to the Office of the Auditor General. Thank you.
So if I've understood you correctly, the plan has not even begun. You're still in reaction mode. Did I understand correctly?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As was outlined in the report of the Office of the Auditor General, a number of improvements and procedures were put in place in response to the pandemic. So building on that work and our ability to respond to the provinces and territories, we'll be taking that further to work on a longer-term strategic plan for the National Emergency Strategic Supply. And that'll include key areas like optimizing our operations, as well as logistic and life cycle management.
Merci. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. And now the agency gave a $108 million contract to Metro Logistics for warehousing services. The contract began October 5th, 2020, and the end is roughly the 31st of July, 2022, because I guess the warehousing services would be obsolete. I understand. So what are the performance standards in the long-term contracts with Metro Logistics? Are there any financial implications or repercussions if the performance is not respected?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I will turn to my colleague at PSPC to assist in responding to that question. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I don't have the specific details on what the performance measures are in terms of that contract, but we'd be happy to return and provide what those would be. But I can assure you that with all of our contracts, we do ensure that our contractors respect the terms of their contracts and honor their requirements and meet the requirements of the contracts.
Si jamais c'est pas le cas.
And if that doesn't happen, if something happens, you never know what life holds in store for a company or what might be happening among the directors. But, if everything's going fine, that's fine. But if the terms are not respected, does the contract include any financial repercussions?
It really depends on the specific contract, whether there are financial penalties.
Je parle de Metro Logistique, là.
I'm talking about Metro Logistics.
Whether that one does contain financial penalties, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe it has specific financial penalties if they don't meet the terms. But certainly, if a contractor was not meeting the terms, we would have termination clauses that would allow us to terminate the contract for default in certain cases.
OK. Combien de soumissions ont été reçues pour ce marché?
How many bids did you receive for this competitive contract, the one that Metro Logistics got?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. Again, I would have to get back to you on how many submissions we received for that in that competition.
OK.
Okay. According to the Office of the Auditor General's report, in April 2020, certain new risks of lower oversight were identified that could lead to errors regarding supply decisions which were not well supported or detailed. The Auditor General found that a mitigation strategy was not established to counteract these risks, and therefore, even if the department was able to accelerate the supply process and procurement process, it had not always demonstrated the necessary oversight. Following the audit, has PSPC looked into having any mitigation strategy to manage the increased risk related to COVID-19 procurement?
Thank you for the question. I will actually turn to Alain Dorion to give who's our Director General within the pandemic response sector, to give a bit of what we're doing to attenuate the risk.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. And unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're out of time. If Mr. Dorian could provide a response in writing, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Avec plaisir.
Merci beaucoup.
It would be my pleasure.
Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to put a series of questions beginning through you to Ms. Evans. And I'm going to ask that the questions be answered in a way that allows me to get on to the next question. So if I intervene, it's because I will have received the answer that I was looking for, not because it was personal. So through you to Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans, how long have you been the Vice President of Emergency Management?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I've been the Vice President since the middle of January 2020.
And how long, through you, Mr. Chair, has Ms. Evans been in the department in the senior roles?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I joined the Public Health Agency in 2015.
Through you, Mr. Chair, who's the president of the emergency management, or is it just VPs?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, our president is the president of the Public Health Agency.
And who would that be?
Our president is Mr. Ian Stewart.
Mr. Ian Stewart. Mr. Chair, I'm wondering through you, if at any time from 2015 and onwards, if Ms. Evans would have been aware of the calls from her department asking for increased funding from the $3 million annual budget that had been earmarked from the years 2012 to 2013 to present.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm unable to answer the question as it's been asked.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering through you, Ms. Evans, were you aware in your department, in your senior roles from 2015, that your department had repeatedly requested additional funding above and beyond the $3 million a year that was set back in 2012?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I am able to speak to certainly the repeated allocation of funding to the NEST program for specific asks.
And would she have provided at any point in time recommendations to the minister to increase funding?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Certainly, we would have been part of the recommendations, which looked at how specific requests that would be required. So no, I couldn't speak to a specific recommendation to the Minister of Health, no.
So we've heard time and time again about modernization, service standards, commodities, and it's almost though this department didn't have any benchmarks to work from. And so I would like for Ms. Evans to comment on the report that was in fact authored by our own Chief Medical Health Officer, Teresa Tam, back in 2006, entitled Canada's Pandemic Influenza Plan for the Public Health Sector. And in it, its requirement to have 16 weeks of stockpile, which would have been good enough for 2 waves. So through you, Mr. Chair, would Ms. Evans have been involved in any decisions to deviate from those benchmarks, those national standards, in the lead up in 2019 when the decision was made to shutter 3 of the 9 national emergency strategic stockpiles, including one location in Regina that threw away 2 million N95 masks?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Certainly in my capacity at the Public Health Agency at that time for those periods, I wouldn't be able to speak to the question which is being posed. Thank you.
What was, through you, Mr. Chair, what was Ms. Evans' role prior to being named VP?
I've held two, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I've held 2 positions within the Public Health Agency. First, as the Director General for the Center for Biosecurity within the Health Security and Infrastructure branch. And secondly, later as the Director General for the Center for Emergency Preparedness and Response.
And as a Director General, as the Director General, would you not have been apprised of Canada's pandemic influenza plan, as written and co-authored by our Chief Medical Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam? You would have never have come across that document and known about the 16-week stockpile benchmark within it?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I believe the document which MP Green is referring to is the 2006 pandemic plan, in which the 16-week for the entire system, which would include our provincial and territorial partners in terms of their level of pandemic readiness. The subsequent revision to that document in 2011 did not have a specific stockpile target with respect to pandemic preparedness, but rather was based on risk assessment. Thank you.
I'll ask this last question through you, Mr. Chair. Based on everything that is known now, understanding that we were only able to deliver 4% of N95 masks to the provinces out of the 56 requests, 12% on the gowns, 18% on the ventilators. Would Ms. Evans not agree that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, under her leadership and her predecessor's leadership, was a catastrophic failure in the lead up to this pandemic?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'd like to clarify that the requests that are received, each of the requests for assistance that are received are assessed to determine context and also the need to determine how we distribute scarcity of supply. And so there were requests for assistance that were based on longer term stockpiling, which would not have been addressed at the front end, and they would have been distributed across a time frame. I would also like to add that those statistics that are being quoted would not include items that have been distributed through the bulk procurement, where 80% of the product and significant quantities were moved to the provinces and territories.
Bulk procurement,
so they're somewhat limited in terms of their reflection of the context.
Happened after these requests were made.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Green. I've finished our first round, and we will now go to the second round, starting with Mr. Paul Hughes for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Evans, the Auditor General's report is quite clear and direct. Clearly, there was a shortcoming on the part of the agency. In 2010, these problems were indicated. In 2013, the findings were again repeated and not resolved. We're talking about a lot of money, always about money. But I think there's a problem that goes beyond money. It's a problem of competence. Following the Auditor General's report, did the agency, was it the agency shaken up? What's going to be done for the future?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, and we thank the Office of the Auditor General for their report, and we've acknowledged that the agency was not as prepared as it could be. We will be working forward in response to the performance audit to have a longer-term strategic plan for the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. It will be focusing on areas including life cycle management.
Madame Evans, je comprends votre réponse.
Ms. Evans, I understand your answer. That's the polite answer. But what I want to know is, did your agency actually notice what was said? Are things shaking up inside? I don't have a lot of time. Next question, Mr. Myos. When we talk about advance payments, in the Auditor General's report, there's talk of $618 million, and that's what was determined by the audits that were conducted of the companies that were audited. But I would like to know, I would like the committee to receive within a week the list of all companies which had advance payment contracts, including the amounts. Can you submit that to the committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take back to see if we can provide the list of all those that have received advance payments. Something we could follow up with.
Quand vous dites vous allez nous revenir.
When you said you'll get back to us, are you going to provide the list to us?
Yeah, compile the list of those that have received advance payments. Yeah.
Merci. Avec les montants, les noms des entreprises.
Thank you, with the names of companies and the amounts. Thank you. And now, Chair, as the committee knows, I submitted a motion within the time required by the committees, and I wanted the following motion to be done. That in the context of its study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Standing Order 108.1a, this committee send for the following documents to be provided by the government: all briefing notes, memorandums for information, memorandums for decision, and documents related to the final contracts on behalf of the government with tests and testing equipment, protective equipment, and vaccines between Friday, May 15, 2020, and Monday, May 31st, 2021, including letters of intention, requests for proposals, justifications for non-competitive bid processes, contract numbers, and solicitation numbers, and final contracts. That the documents be submitted electronically to the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than noon Eastern Time on Friday, August 13, 2021, that the documents be published publicly on the committee's website by Wednesday, August the 18th, 2021, and that departments tasked with gathering and releasing the following documents do their assessment and vetting as would be done through the access to information process. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Paul Hoos, the motion is on the table. Is there any debate? Mr. McKinnon, I see your hand is up.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Mr. Mills and Ms. Evans for appearing here. I suspect that your interventions are over for the day, and Mr. Dorion as well. As to the issue raised by my colleague, Mr. Paul Hoos, since the beginning of this pandemic, we have seen the unbelievable contributions of civil servants, of people from the Public Health Agency of Canada and their counterparts in the provinces and territories, as well as in First Nations communities. But also people in procurement who've worked so hard and so many hours, day and night. And I've saw this myself, working with suppliers across the globe. As the Auditor General has said, without repeating her testimony, I believe that she has confirmed that the rating that she would give to the people at public service procurement when it comes to PPE procurement is not only a passing grade, but she has raised her hat to them in terms of the balance they were able to demonstrate by providing Canadians and through the PHAC offering our health professionals personal protective equipment. So let's sum the facts up, Chair. We saw 2.7 billion items of equipment come into Canada, into the hands of the Canadian government to be distributed, redistributed into the healthcare system. We launched an appeal to Canadian industry. And the industry stepped up and demonstrated with their ingenuity, either by building temporary manufacturing sites for hand sanitizer, distilleries or breweries, which were making alcohol-based products or sanitizer, or companies such as 3M, Medicom, who established new capacities for manufacturing personal protective equipment such as N95 masks.
If I interrupt, Mr. McKinnon, I apologize. In the light of not using up our witnesses' time, and I'm wondering if perhaps Mr. McKinnon, Mr. Drouin would share with us if they just intend to filibuster this to stop it, and if so, perhaps we could just move to adjourn the debate and allow the witnesses and everyone else to proceed with their days and leave.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
And your smirk was still showing on TV there, Mr. McKinnon.
So, I mean, recognizing that that is the case, but being a point of order, we cannot.
I recognize it's not a regular point of order, but in respect of everyone's time.
I respect your comments, and the reality is, I mean, if the committee decides that at some point when they have the floor that they would prefer to adjourn the debate on this motion to another time, then that needs to be put forward by someone from the floor. Mr. McKinnon?
I'm sure if Mr. McKinnon would put through that motion, I'm sure we would support it. If that's the case.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Mr. McKinnon?
Donc, Monsieur le Président, je suis très heureux d'ajouter.
Chair, I'd be very happy to adjourn the debate on the, or to move the motion and to come back subject to being able to regain my place and my right to speak when we resume.
Okay, so Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, you move to suspend the debate on this motion at this time?
Correct.
Correct. And do I have unanimous consent for that? Thumbs up. Yes, I see that. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. And with that said, I will thank you, Mr. McKinnon, and we will we'll continue. I want to thank the witnesses for bearing with us as we went through this. We will now move on to Mr. Johari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, welcome to the witnesses. Found the AG's testimony as well as yours quite informative. Let me start with Mr. Mills. Mr. Mills, the Auditor General in her statements noted that the various departments appear to have taken away lesson learned from the past projects and have introduced agile procurement practices. Can you specifically share with us what does that mean in terms of your department, and what actual action has been taken by your department to be able to benefit from those lessons learned?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think some of the things that we've learned and we've been kind of had to work with is how do we leverage our systems like our new electronic procurement system, which we've been able to use to our advantage to move quickly through procurements and to engage the market in a different area. This is a platform that we think will be able to enable us to engage with industry in a different way than we did in the past. Some of the other issues that we've approaches that we've learned is we did a call to action early in and we engaged industry, and it created a platform for industry to come back to us and propose different ways that we could meet the challenge of Canadians. So some of the lessons learned there will be that earlier on in the process, rather than trying to fully define what we think is the requirement, there may be new ways to engage industry to work together to figure out what the requirements could be or how industry could better respond to the needs of government. Those would be two ways that we would look at kind of being able to move more in a more agile and more timely fashion to kind of meet the needs of Canadians and government departments going forward.
Thank you. It was quite interesting you mentioned the industry. Based on the table that was provided to us by the Library of Parliament, I'm looking at the medical supplies ordered and received by Government of Canada. Looks like we've ordered to the tune of 2.7 billion, and this target was set to be delivered by 31st of March 2020. And as I'm looking at the percentage of what's been delivered, aside from gloves that was mentioned earlier, and probably N95 and some medical ventilators, the rest of them they're almost all here, and they've almost been delivered. So that target, when I look at the date, it puts us 10 months ahead of schedule of having these supplies received. Now, can you share with us what percentage of these are from non-industry based suppliers or manufacturer in Canada?
Sorry, non-industry based?
Yeah.
Or like how many are domestic?
How many are domestic? That's a better way of saying it. Thank you for helping. So yeah. How much of it are domestic? How much of it is international?
So in terms of our overall response to the pandemic, including goods and services, we're about 40%. I'd have to get you the specific percentage just on that 2.7 billion items. Maybe it'd be lower than that.
Okay, so 40% are domestic, 60% were non-domestic, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So out of the ones that have been delivered, has it been mainly from non-domestic?
In terms of the 2.7 billion, it would have been a combination of both. The outstanding deliveries would be, for the most part, international deliveries.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking this line of questioning is because I have a group of PPE manufacturer, Canadian PPE Manufacturer Association in my riding. And what they've done, they've reached out to me and they said, hey, look, the government came in and asked us to build the capacity. We build the capacity. Now, is there a possibility that we could reevaluate our international commitment, because some of those international commitment benefit from the subsidy from the government, it's helping them to manufacture and putting them in the competitive position. Are we in a position to be able to do an analysis of how much of these non-domestic contract we've left, and is there any way that we could reevaluate our interest in fulfilling that demand from the domestic manufacturers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. A couple points I'd raise on that. Two kind of outstanding areas of delivery, or I would say three, are gloves, N95 masks, and gowns. For the gowns and the N95, those are predominantly, the deliveries are those in those two categories will be from domestic manufacturers. They're small to volume. A large volume of outstanding deliveries are for nitrile gloves. Unfortunately, at the current time, there is no manufacturing capacity in Canada for nitrile gloves. But one of the things that we did launch early in the year was an invitation to qualify, to invite industry to see if there was a way that we could actually approach Canadian companies to establish nitrile glove manufacturing in Canada. We're still pursuing that process.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. We will now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very, very much. So we saw that a few months before the pandemic, millions of items of material were thrown out. Once the pandemic is over, I know that you have said that right now we're still in the stage of needs for gowns and certain things that we're not producing either at all or enough of in Canada. But once the country's needs go down, what are the risks that what's currently stored is going to expire? Are there risks? And if so, what means is the agency taking to be sure that there is not going to be any other repeat of such a waste of so much resource?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this one, I'd maybe ask Alain Dorion to elaborate.
Thank you. I don't wish to divert the question, but it seems to me that the question was for Public Health Agency of Canada. Isn't that correct? Yes, no, it was for the agency, yes.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. And it's an excellent question. We will, as we go forward, continue to work on a number of options, life cycle management, and the objective of not having to move to disposal, which would be the last resort. We are working collectively with other government departments, a number of whom have requirements for personal protective equipment. That's one of the avenues in which we would look at. What are the deployment options as well? As we have discussed, what are some of the divestment options, including looking at international donation, but as well, there are other aspects in our Canadian environment where personal protective equipment would be necessary. We continue to work collaboratively with our provinces and territories in terms of their ongoing needs, and we continue to receive requests for assistance from provinces and territories. So working with them, and as had been mentioned by the Auditor General, using the supply-demand modeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans, is it safe to say that each of the remaining 6 National Emergency Strategic Stockpile facilities had within them the purview to distribute the commodities, the N95s and all of them, to the regions in which they were located?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The National Emergency Strategic Stockpile is managed centrally, and the premise with which Mr. Green has put forward would not be correct, no.
So you would have N95 masks in Regina, gloves in Montreal, gowns in Vancouver to be able to distribute out to the provinces? Or would you have a little bit at each location?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. We would manage the supplies in a manner in which they could be distributed to the provinces within an appropriate time frame. So we've set a 24-hour time frame. So certainly disclosing the location of our specific commodities would not be something that the Public Health Agency would put forward. Thank you.
So you threw away 2 million N95 masks out of Regina, through you, Mr. Chair. How many other N95 masks did you throw away in the other 2 locations?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. When a decision is taken to close a warehouse facility, all of the equipment that can be used is moved to other locations, is moved centrally back to our central warehousing.
That wasn't the question, Mr. Chair. That was not the question. The question was, out of the other locations that were shuttered, how many other N95 masks were disposed of?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm not aware of a record of disposal of N95s from other warehouse locations. Thank you.
Mr. Mills, are you responsible for the contracting out of the disposals at Regina? Would that be a contract that would be under your purview?
I'm not aware that we were under contract for that disposal.
Would your department be responsible for contracting out people for instances of disposal, or is that something that Ms. Evans would have directed in her purview or her predecessor's purview in her department?
In that specific case, I would have to get you the details of what involvement, if any, there was with PSPC. But
well, if it's the case, I would ask through you, Mr. Chair, that both of them provide a response to see which companies were contracted for the disposals of whatever remaining expired PPEs at the other 2 locations. They don't even have to give us the location, although I'm sure they could be found, and bring it back in writing within the next 2 weeks so that we can have the ability to review it. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green, and thank you for that. And if the witnesses would be able to provide an answer to his question, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, witnesses. Mr. Mills, if we can just get back, can you walk me through the breakdown again of how much we've provided to the SNC consortium, for lack of better words, for the mobile health unit being held in reserve? Was it 64 million? Did I hear that right?
Just under 64 million, yes.
And what is that for? I know there's some design fees, but what else? What is that broken down into? Because last I looked, I think when we looked at the mains, I think it was 26 million was for advance. 26 million cash was advanced to them to purchase items. So what's in that 64 million?
So it's both design and development costs. It's also for the purchase of the equipment of a complete unit, which is a 100-bed MHU, as well as equipment and supplies to go into those. In this case, we ordered additional supplies that could be used across different units.
Okay. I mentioned in the supplementary estimates that just came out, there's 659 million for added costs, et cetera, purchasing of the mobile health units. Now, it's not all for SNC for the mobile health units, but do you know how much of that 659 is for those mobile health units?
I do not have the specific number, how much is provisioned for additional task authorizations.
Yeah. Now, how much more money are we going to be spending on this SNC sole source consortium for these unused hospital?
Again,
the reason I ask, I mean, the third wave is over. 70% of adults have been vaccinated. Are we still pushing money toward this project when it's been clear from day one that it wasn't needed?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for the question. So the purchasing of the MHUs was certainly to have the capacity to add to provincial and territorial responses to COVID. We're not, the pandemic is not complete. Two are deployed,
that, Mr. Mills, but no province has asked for it, and the military didn't ask for them. Public health did not ask for them. The public health minister did not ask for them. Someone in PSPC on their own created a need, and an urgent need, which was used to justify $150 million sole source contract. Is so urgent that not one of them has been used. So you understand, and I'm sorry I'm putting you in a difficult spot, but you understand my concern. This is taxpayers' money, and it seemed to be an urgent need created out of thin air for something that turned out wasn't urgently needed. And it wasn't requested by any health ministers across the country or any health officials, it appears. So we'd certainly like to get to the bottom of how much more this is going to cost taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would note that 2 of the units are actually up and running and were deployed for the third wave in Ontario. The whole intent of having these was 2 of the
from the other company.
2 were Weatherhaven, and
right.
Again,
but
there are 2 differences.
I'm talking specifically SNC Lavalin, the consortium.
Mr. Chair, to clarify, there are 2 different design types. It's not just a consortia. One, which is a freestanding external application, which is the Weatherhaven one.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the Weatherhaven one, specifically the money toward the SNC.
Which is set for an internal location. Right. We had previously had a request from one province which considered an internal application, which that would have actually been used for.
Was that request from the province before or after the sole source contract given to SNC?
The request from provinces were after. As we mentioned before, the department leaned forward, procured these given the long lead times to acquire the material and put in place MHUs as an anticipatory procurement for the needs from provinces and territories. Again, looking around the world, many jurisdictions were setting up temporary hospitals and putting this capacity in place to be able to respond to the pandemic.
Yeah. What do you foresee as the final cost for this? Is it too difficult to say right now?
It is too difficult.
Okay. Thanks. I'm going to just pop over to PHAC. The plan that you're going to be developing post pandemic for the stockpile, what are the biggest challenges that you're going to be facing developing this, developing the plan? Is it around the unpredictability of future pandemics? Is it just the ongoing things as things are changing now with the pandemic?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think 2 things that I would highlight. We've had excellent information sharing with the provinces and territories in terms of burn rates and stockpiling.
Sorry, can I interrupt just for 2 seconds?
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. If you can feel you can provide us with some further information, that'd be appreciated to that question. We will now go to Mr. Drouin for 5 minutes, and this is our last round of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say I'm glad we live in a country where we've had and procured mobile units, and thankfully we didn't need them, but they were deployed, but hopefully, in Ontario, watching the situation, it did get a little bit out of hand, but they did manage to manage this. And I'm glad that we live in a country where we were ready. I know there's been some areas of contention, but I just want to thank all the officials who work day in and day out. And Mr. Chair, I want to be respectful of the translators who've been doing a good job. I know we were told that 5:45 was the end time, so I will cede my time and just end it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin, and I appreciate that. And likewise, the whole committee, want to thank the interpreters and the translators for the work that they've done and the tremendous challenges and for bearing with us this little extra time. With that said, I would like to thank Ms. Evans and Mr. Mills and Mr. Dorian for bearing with us today and responding to our questions. And as I mentioned earlier, if you can respond to some of the questions that have been asked for, and please submit that to the clerk so that we can disperse that amongst the committee members. And with that said, I want to thank everybody and have a good night, and I declare the meeting adjourned.